It is very possible to break into tech sales, but tech sales fundamentally is so different than many other types of sales. And after working with hundreds of different people who have broken in, after making the change from engineering to tech sales myself, I wanted to walk through why tech sales is different than so many other industries in sales and what you need to understand before applying to different tech sales companies. Now again, it's important to note, this isn't like mind-blowing information, but so many people miss on this fundamental framework of what tech sales is actually like that when they come into interviews, they're mimicking what they've seen in movies, they're mimicking, I don't know, their colleague who's in car sales or whatever it might be, or maybe they're coming from car sales, logistics sales, wherever, and they think that that's going to map directly onto what tech sales is like. And fundamentally, it's so different because of a few different things. In tech, obviously, you have to have some level of technical aptitude to be able to sell to developers, to enterprise architects, to highly technical folks. So that is one element in of itself. It doesn't require that you know code. It doesn't require that you're a technical expert, but you've got to be sharp enough to understand the technology side to have relevant conversations. Additionally, when you're selling to larger organizations or especially technologies that are the backbone of a tech company, for instance, like my first sales job was in the database world. When you're selling a database, if a company is using that, their entire company runs on your database. So this is a very important decision, and it's not to say things like buying cars, things like logistics sales are not, but those are more transactional in nature. It's not a matter of someone when they're buying a car or buying a shipment in logistics or whatever it might be, they're not betting their entire life on that vehicle. They are usually the sole decision maker in that process, whereas in technical sales, not only do you have to appeal to the technical folks, but for the business folks who aren't involved in the day-to-day tech, they've got to understand the monetary value associated with buying this tool. Are they convinced that the technology does actually fit their use case? Are they convinced that they have the proper team in place that can actually implement that technology? Are they convinced that paying 3 times, 4 times, 5 times more than what they're already paying currently is going to still get them a higher return on their investment than what they're doing currently and just staying the status quo? These are types of things I'll break down further, but again, it's important to note that at least at a minimum, now we understand that tech sales is very consultative in nature. So we've got to consult the technical side, help them understand what our product even does, how it's different than what they're doing right now. But also as we work our way up into the account, we've got to be able to tie both technical and business value to the outcome of this tool that they're using. When I see new candidates in interviews or when I'm talking to people through this website, through YouTube, etc., a lot of times they think that sales is being highly confident, talking and saying, we're the latest and greatest, we have all these great features. And in reality, especially early on in the discovery or qualification part of the process, and especially as an SDR, a lot of what you're doing is trying to qualify if someone you're talking to is even a fit for what you're doing. You're not calling and saying, hey, buy us because we're this great new solution. You're saying like, hey, do you have any of these different challenges that are relevant to your product? Hey, I noticed your company is using this product. Are you reaching any common limitations that we see, like scaling, whatever it might be? You're trying to open conversations and see if a prospect might genuinely find value in your product. At that point, again, this is getting beyond the scope of an entry-level position, but you would bring in your account executive and the broader team to have a really deep discussion on the technology. And so if you're preparing for a tech sales interview, let's say you've actually got an interview now and you've never done sales, or you've done sales and you haven't done tech sales before. Again, it's great to know all about and still do tons of research on the company, on their specific product, what are their major feature products, etc. But again, when you're going into the interview setting, a lot of times you'll be asked to do a cold call, maybe script a cold email, or even do things like a discovery call, an example call, etc. So still put in all that research in terms of maybe making note cards if you need to, reading case studies certainly, practicing and recording your voice if you need to talk about how you've memorized the product. But when you're actually in the interview, drafting a cold email, talking to a hiring manager about the product, or doing like example role play calls, etc. You're not calling and saying, hey John, this is Eric with Tech Company. How you doing today? And then they're like, I'm good. It's like, hey, I wanted to call because our product has done X, Y, and Z for this customer, and we have really great features around scalability. I was just wondering if I could set up a conversation. Like, that prospect is not going to care at all. And this starts to hit on, again, some of that fundamental difference where you're not calling in and talking all about how great your product is. You're calling and asking them what they're doing today, asking them if they've had challenges around this, maybe showing that you've done research on their product. Like one of the biggest deals I ever signed was with an e-commerce company. I could call and say, hey, I noticed you guys are in the e-commerce space. This was right as COVID started. I would imagine you've got a ton of growth ahead. I was just curious if you're confident in your database and how you're handling all that massive increase in data. Those are ways that you can start conversations. And only as you begin talking to that prospect, only as you begin getting information, you can ask questions like, oh, it does sound like you have problems scaling. At that point, again, we're not saying our solution scales. We're saying, I guess, tell me a little bit more about that. Like, how much more are you expecting to scale this year? How much, as an example, maybe you have a great conversation around scale and it's like, hey, just curious, I know with the increase in traffic, you're probably going to be expecting more revenue generated. Is that something you've budgeted for if it solves this problem? Do you have, what are your thoughts on paying for an enhanced service or things of that nature? Again, these are examples I'm making up on the fly. If I'm actually doing research on an account, if I'm actually in a discovery call, I'm going to be way more pointed. But notice at any given point in the last minute, I haven't talked anything about our features. And that's the key difference in tech sales versus many other sales. There are elements of consultative selling in different verticals for sure. But I have friends in logistics sales. I have friends in car sales. And by extension, it's very transactional when compared to tech sales. You are certainly consulting them. You're certainly trying to understand their needs. But in tech sales, you've got to know your product well enough and use that to generate very intelligent questions to ask prospects about their situation. How are they doing things today? How much are they spending? What are some of the biggest problems that they see over the next 12 to 24 months if they do continue to grow? These are pure examples. But then as you transition out of that entry-level role to account executive, now it's really important to understand the key value propositions of your technology and not only address the technical concerns, you'll have engineering help at that point on the line, but also making a point to get introduced up the chain to whether it's the CTO who ultimately buys or there's broader business stakeholders involved like the CEO, product managers, etc. You've got to be able to toe the line of both technical and business value to those end users. So just restating, this is a simple mindset shift that you need to have if you're breaking into tech sales. Continue to do the extensive research that you've done on the products of the company you're working for. Continue to research case studies. But when you show up to that interview and you're asked to generate a sample cold email or make a sample role play cold call, it's not about talking about all those things you learned because that's so tempting when you're trying to break in. You want to show them you've done a ton of research on the product. You want to show them you can learn all about it. But especially if you're coming in and equipped to ask questions around some of the major features, then I'm really excited as a hiring manager because not only have you shown that you can learn a lot about the information, you can memorize it and handle yourself on the fly, but you're so far into your research that you've realized you can ask intelligent questions that set up the ability for you as a tech salesperson to then talk about the value that your product provides if it's a fit for that prospect. So again, at this point, I don't want to get too far outside of the scope of the video, and it's great if you're taking a lot of initiative, have watched this video, other content as well as you prepare to break into tech sales. But I think the biggest thing, again, is as you get into an SDR role, yes, it's great to show that you can learn the product. Yes, it's great to show that you are composed and can handle yourself on the phone. But there's many times where SDR 6 to 12 months to 18 months into the role, if they're not able to know their technology enough, if they're not able candidly to tell some customers that they're probably not a fit for what your technology does and not waste everyone's time up the chain to get them all involved, that is the skill set that's really going to allow you to grow, that's really going to make you stand out in an interview and beyond. So I hope that helps. We will see you next week. Appreciate your time.